Gandhian definition, which is as follows. Trusteeship obligations inherent in company operations where assets and resources are pooled and entrusted to the managers for optimal utilization in the stakeholders' interest. And I like the phrase stakeholders' interest because it really is then taking it at a much wider level. Let me sort of stop here for a moment and also make the point that whatever I'm stating now are really my personal views and not representing my official MFin capacity. Now, looking at the Gandhian definition in particular, it does seem to me that good governance is more than anything else an ideal, like perfect democracy or perfect justice. And while in the real world we look for it, we look around, and we don't seem to find it. More often than not, it does appear to be a bit of a chimera, where you think you're seeing it, you think it is there, you think it's for real, but actually, when the acid test takes place, something else happens. As a part of all that, we do end up framing all kinds of guidelines and frameworks and rules and so on. My dear friend Greg and his organization will write some very nice papers on things like that. But frankly, I mean, at the end of it, when we encounter the real world, what do we find? I think the past 2 years, particularly in the financial sector, have only, I think, shown to us what corporate greed, personal greed, corporate and personal power play, and so on, do to an organization and to society at large. I need not dwell on that, frankly. We're all very familiar with the developments around the world and the kind of crises we've all gone through in the financial system. And let me dare say that if there was really good corporate governance prevailing, would all that happen? I mean, it's an open question, really. I mean, I might even go to the extent of saying that all the shenanigans we've witnessed in the temples of high finance in the last 2 years only bear out the reality of that fact that corporate governance, good to talk about, good to have discussion on, but when you get down to the reality, various kinds of things happen. With that as the preamble, let me sort of talk more about the Indian context, which I know obviously much better than South Asia or the world at large. As we all know very well, the Indian microfinance industry has had very dramatic growth, very rapid growth over the past 5 years. Compounded annual growth rate of anywhere between 65 to 70%. The larger players in particular have in fact grown at over 100%. I find in the audience my dear friend Sanjay Sinha, who would probably say that the number is even higher for some companies. And with that kind of growth, there has obviously been a huge amount of stress, I would imagine, within the organizations, within the sector. And as a part of all that, a whole host of challenges for the organizations themselves on the one side, for the professional managers on the other, and of course, for the regulators on the third. Very recently, without wanting to make any comment on that, we've had a whole set of situations arising in India in the context of some of the organizations. So this kind of just brings me back to the core point that corporate governance is something which we all strive for. We try and create within the organization structures to make that happen. But at the end of it, we do find that in reality, it doesn't play out quite as nicely, quite as smoothly, quite as well as we would all like to believe and see it. And then, I also make this point in the context of the fact that in India, particularly, given the fact of our having a very noisy, boisterous democracy, and microfinance and MFIs in particular, dealing with the constituency, a client segment, which is politically so very sensitive, which also at a societal level, for that matter, is so very important. Our own vision of what India shall be in the next decade is, I think, very deeply, let's say, sort of mixed up with the way the MFIs are able to perform over the next decade. If they do the right thing, they do it well, we can look at a certain kind of India. If they do it badly, we might look at a different kind of India. And I'm saying this also in the context of social justice for that matter. So therefore, be it the government, be it the regulators, be it the organizations themselves, the interplay of a whole bunch of these forces, I think, is driving a lot of things. And at the heart of it is, yes, the need for what you might regard as genuine corporate governance. Now, in this context, I just close by making some points on what I personally regard as the key drivers for good corporate governance, or the issues around that. The promoter CEO and the direction in which he drives the organization. I think the promoter CEOs are very, very critical to the way the organization develops and the kind of structures you begin to see in the organization. Second, independent directors. How many, what is their stature, how are they able to stand up for themselves, and give a sense of independent direction to the organization. Third, the banks and the investors themselves. I mean, I think in lots of ways, the bank, particularly in India, because they are the primary funders to the MFIs, and of course the investors, have a very, very large role to play in terms of the way the organization takes shape, takes form, and is able to move ahead. Next, regulatory interventions. The regulator, be it the central bank, be it the capital market regulators, and so on, I think they have a large role to play in the way the organization takes shape and the way it is able to really deal with governance issues. And lastly, what I would regard as the ambitions and the growth plans of the organization themselves, because if they're looking at a certain kind of growth, they have certain ambitions for themselves, I think they have to put out more strongly that they have very strong governance structures internally. Let's say right now, for example, in India, you have a situation where the central bank and the government are looking at new banking licenses. Many MFIs have an ambition for that. Having a good governance structure, being able to demonstrate that they have good governance within the organization would be very helpful. Similarly, currently, all microfinance companies cannot take deposits. If they want to take the next step and become deposit-taking, similarly, I think to build that credibility vis-a-vis the regulator would be a function of how well they're able to demonstrate that, yes, their governance structures are the way they ought to be. With that, I shall end. I mean, I do have some data with me with regard to many of the Indian companies, and where, in a formal sense, they have done all the right things. And therefore, it does give us some degree of hope, some confidence. And just to briefly share with you, I sort of looked at random Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 institutions in the country, without getting into names, but we have pretty much all the significant names in the country. All of them have, in a structural sense, all the right things. The board composition, I mean, they have independent directors, they have investors, representatives on the board, and therefore the board is fairly well balanced. They have all the nice committees, be it the audit, or be it the risk management, or be it this, or be it that. And quite frankly, if I look at the sheets in front of me, which I'll be happy to pass on and share with everybody, anybody who has an interest, at a structural level, I think all the right things are happening. But having said that, it's an evolving reality, and one can only hope. Thank you.
One line.
Thank you, Alok, for those insightful comments. We have now seen the conclusion of the first part of this session. Let me first stimulate some questions from the head table and then perhaps flow it through to the audience. There are a lot was said about independence of directors in MFIs and this sort of business. If I can just touch on this with Alok. Alok, I know that